Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back through time into a world without electric lights, without warm showers, without even the faintest notion of toothpaste. You're not lounging in your bed anymore. You're inside a crumbling stone hut, the air thick with the smell of smoke mildew and something sour you can't quite name. Outside, the mud is knee-deep. Inside, it's not much better. Your clothes itch, your teeth ache, and your stomach is already grumbling from its next hunger pang. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where the dark wasn't just about the lack of candles, but the grim reality of living every day unsure if you'd wake up the next. You probably won't survive this, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're up for it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far we reach. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pull the scratchy blanket closer to your chin, but it barely helps. The cold is the sort that settles deep into your bones and stays there. The year is somewhere around 1250. You wouldn't really know for sure there are no calendars hanging on walls. There aren't even real walls in some places. Just wattle and daub crumbling wood, maybe a bit of rough stone if you're lucky enough not to be poor. But let's be honest, you're poor. Almost everyone is. The truth is, life in the Middle Ages was brutish, short, and confusing. You've woken up before dawn because the rooster doesn't care how tired you are, and you've got a full day of back-breaking labor ahead. Even the children don't get a pass. They've already been up helping haul water from the well, which might be half a mile away, or worse, from a stream shared with livestock and filth. Breakfast. If you're fortunate, it's some thin porridge made from barley. No sugar, no milk, just a warm, gray mush. You might not even get that. Maybe just a crust of black bread that's gone hard overnight and might have a few weevils crawling through it. You sigh, but you eat it anyway. You can't afford to be picky. You can't afford to be anything, really. The Middle Ages didn't give people much of a choice. You lived in cycles, harvest, hunger, survival. And when the winter months came, those cycles got mean. You might spend days inside a smoky room breathing soot, freezing your toes off, hoping the salted meat doesn't run out. Hope, there's always hope, but there's not much else. You want to wash your hands, but there's no soap. Not like we know it. You scrape some lye and ash together, but that stings and leaves your skin raw. You splash some icy water on your face, wincing. Your breath fogs the air. You haven't bathed in weeks. Most people don't. It's not laziness, it's survival. Warm water is a rare luxury, and the church often discouraged full-body bathing. Supposedly, it tempted sin. So you learn to live with the grime, the itch, and the odor. Outside, the village stirs. Hooves clop through the muck carts, creak under the weight of harvested wheat and rotting vegetables, and a man shouts something in a dialect you barely understand, though he lives 100 yards away. Dialects change every few miles, and you can't read, so you can't write anything down. You measure things in hands, in paces, in seasons. There's no time for reflection. You work, you eat, you sleep. You try not to die. Still, you've got to get to the fields. The Lord owns the land, and you owe him labor. You don't get a paycheck. You get protection, at least in theory. He keeps the bandits away sometimes. He lets you live on his land, technically. But if you miss your work, if you speak out of turn, if your harvest fails, well, that's your problem and your punishment. You could lose your home. You could be fined or worse. Even the church, meant to be your sanctuary, offers little relief. You go every Sunday, required, not optional. You kneel on cold stone, listening to Latin you can't understand, while the priest, who might be the only literate man for miles, reminds you that your suffering is your ticket to heaven. Don't complain. Don't question. Just obey. You've seen people punished publicly. Stocks, whippings, the village square echoing with jeers. The Lord's steward handing out justice like it's routine. Steal a loaf of bread. That's a hand gone. Speak ill of the priest. That's a branding. Gossip about your neighbor's strange habits. That might be enough to get you called a witch. People go missing sometimes. You learn not to ask why. There's a family nearby with a sick child. Fevered, moaning, tossing under a pile of straw. No one knows what to do, and the healer has some herbs and superstitions. Maybe it's a curse. Maybe it's punishment. Maybe it's just the will of God. You say a prayer under your breath and move on. That's all you can do. Life expectancy hovers somewhere in your 30s if you're lucky. A cut can kill you. A toothache can become an infection that spreads to your brain. Women die in childbirth regularly. Children don't always make it past their 5th birthday. You've buried siblings. Maybe you've buried your own child. Grief is common. Tears are part of life. You hear the bell from the church tower. It's time for midday prayer. You pause, cross yourself, and go back to work. You don't feel any better, but maybe, just maybe, you've done enough to keep misfortune away for another day. Your hands are cracked. Your feet are cold. Your back aches in ways you can't name. But you keep going, because there is no other choice. The day drags on. The sky turns a hazy gray. Smoke curls from chimneys. You think of dinner, maybe stew if there's something left from yesterday. You can almost smell the onions boiling, but you've got another hour or two of work left. You sigh. Just keep walking. A scream cuts through the air. You stop. Not because it's rare, but because it's always disturbing. Someone is being punished again. You don't look. You keep your head down. You've learned that's safest. And so you press on toward another night, another cold sleep, another uncertain morning. But in the darkness, something else is stirring, not just fear, but whispers of power, of sorcery, of monsters in human form. And that's where we're heading next. You don't believe in magic, at least not the kind from stories. But here in the Middle Ages, belief isn't optional. It's stitched into your worldview like thread in a peasant's tunic. You don't just think about curses and witches and omens, you live alongside them. You fear them as you fear disease or hunger. They're real to you because when your crops fail or your child falls ill, there has to be a reason. And sometimes the only explanation anyone has is something dark, something unseeable, something just beyond the edge of the firelight. And so you start watching your neighbors more closely. There's a woman on the edge of the village, older alone, muttering to herself. You've seen her collect herbs from the woods. She wears dark clothes, walks with a crooked gait, and smells of garlic and damp earth. People whisper that she talks to animals. You try not to look her in the eyes. If your cow goes dry, if your bread doesn't rise, you might start to wonder, was it her? You're not crazy. You're just trying to survive. In a world where understanding is scarce and science is unheard of, suspicion becomes your armor. You've seen what happens when fear takes over. You've seen women dragged from their homes, their hair ripped out, their feet branded, forced to confess to things they don't understand. You've heard bones break under the weight of accusations. Torture isn't a hidden thing. It's public like everything else. A show, a warning. And those shows draw crowds. You remember when the priest announced an inquiry? That meant someone in the village had been accused of heresy. You didn't know what they'd done, maybe nothing. Maybe they read a strange book or said something wrong or looked at the sky in a way that made someone uncomfortable. It doesn't matter. The bishop's men came dressed in dark robes carrying scrolls and crucifixes. They spoke in Latin. They wrote everything down. The questioning lasted hours, days. The accused was held in the church's cellar, chained, starved, broken down until their words didn't make sense anymore. Eventually, they confessed. They always do. And when the flames lit up the sky a few days later, everyone watched. Some prayed, some cried, some just stared. The smell lingered for days. You've seen what happens to different. And yet you can't help but feel the pull of the stories. Around the fire at night, someone always brings them up. Tales of forest spirits of fairies stealing children of men who turn into wolves by moonlight. You don't laugh. You listen. Because in the Middle Ages, the line between myth and memory is tissue thin. These are more than bedtime tales. They're warnings. You've heard about the werewolf trials in France. Men accused of shape-shifting, of eating their neighbors, of sneaking into barns under the full moon. They were tried and executed not as men, but as beasts. In your world, transformation is not symbolic. It is feared, and it must be punished. The church teaches you to reject the old beliefs, but not everyone listens. Deep in the countryside, away from the eyes of the clergy, people still tie ribbons to trees for good luck. They still leave bread out for wandering spirits. They still bury their dead with coins or iron knives, just in case. Better safe than sorry. You remember the time a child went missing. The village searched for days. When the body was found, half-eaten, barely clothed, the whispers started again. Wolves, some said, but others pointed toward darker things, something unnatural, maybe even a pact. A mother clutched her cross tighter. A man sharpened his pitchfork. You felt it in the air, the hunger for someone to blame. And often, it's the midwives who bear the weight. The women who know too much about herbs, about bleeding, about childbirth. They help bring life into the world. But when that life fails, suspicion follows. Too much power in the hands of a woman is dangerous here. If you're a man, you might fear her. If you're a woman, you might resent her. Either way, the result is the same: the flames, the gallows, the silence. But magic isn't just fear, it's also hope. You've seen people wear charms to ward off disease, hang bones above their doors, carve crosses into their thresholds. The belief is everywhere. It comforts even when it misleads. You've drunk teas that claim to protect you from demons. You've watched the village healer chant under her breath while laying herbs across a sick man's chest. You don't know if it works, but what else do you have? And above it all, the church looms large, not just as a building, but as an idea, a hierarchy that stretches all the way to Rome beyond anything you'll ever see with your own eyes. Its rituals guide your week, its holy days mark your year. But it's also the guardian of orthodoxy. And that means it's the guardian of fear. You know about the Inquisition, Maybe not the details, but the word carries weight. It means something big, something terrifying is watching. And even if you're innocent, you're not safe. You've seen people condemned on whispers alone. You've heard confessions wrung from bloodied lips. The truth doesn't matter here, only obedience does. Sometimes you wonder why it has to be like this, why pain is part of faith, why fear is part of life. But then you remember your place. You are a peasant, a laborer, a servant. You don't question the world. You survive it. But there's another darkness coming, not just the fear of witches and wolves, but of death itself. And not just death from disease or punishment, but a horror that will sweep across continents, striking down rich and poor alike. Something no charm can stop, no prayer can delay. The Black Death is stirring, and the darkest chapter of the Middle Ages is about to begin. It begins quietly. A cough here, a fever there. A merchant dies suddenly on the road. A child grows pale and listless. You hear rumors, just murmurs at first, from the next village over. People getting sick, whole families falling ill. You shrug. Sickness isn't new. Life is always fragile. But something feels different this time. It spreads too fast. Kills too many. And then one day, it reaches your door. You wake to the sound of bells tolling. Not the church's call to prayer, these are death bells. Low, steady, ominous. 1 ring for a man, 2 for a woman, 3 for a child. You lose count before the sun fully rises. People whisper of a ship that arrived in the harbor weeks ago, its crew half dead, its cargo forgotten. Rats scurried down the gangplank unnoticed. Fleas hitched rides on their backs. And now those fleas carry death. You don't understand the science. No one does. But you see the bodies. They swell, they darken, they weep. Bulbous boils grow under the arms and the groin, on the neck. Black, stinking, painful to the touch. Victims scream in agony, then fall silent within days, sometimes hours. Blood darkens their fingertips, their eyes roll back. Their breath stinks of rot before they stop breathing altogether. You've never seen anything like it. No one has. They call it the Great Mortality. Later it will be known as the Black Death. But right now it's just everywhere. You stay inside. You bar the door. You pray more often, more desperately. But prayer doesn't stop the dying. The priests still come at first, swinging censers, muttering Latin blessings over the sick. But soon even they start dying. Monks collapse mid-sermon. Bishops lock themselves away. The churchyards overflow. Graves are dug in haste, then abandoned. You see dogs sniffing at shallow mounds of dirt. Soon you stop seeing anyone at all. The village grows quiet. The streets once filled with carts and laughter now lie still. A silence takes over, not the peaceful kind, but something eerie hollow. Windows are boarded. Doors hang open. The smell is unbearable. You try to stay busy. Work distracts you. You tend to your tiny plot of land, but even that seems meaningless now. Your neighbors vanish one by one. Sometimes they're taken in the night. Other times you hear them scream for hours before the end. Food becomes scarce. Trade collapses. Markets close. The baker is gone. The butcher's stall is empty. You chew dry roots and moldy crusts, grateful for anything that doesn't smell of decay. Hunger gnaws at your belly, but it's nothing compared to the fear. What if you're next? You boil water obsessively. You stuff herbs into your nose, sage, rosemary, lavender, anything to block out the stench. You've heard the plague rides on foul air, so you burn incense constantly. Some people carry posies or clutch sweet-smelling rags to their mouths. You do what they do. You have no better ideas. The healers are helpless. They bleed the sick, leech them, pierce their boils with hot irons. It does nothing. Some suggest wearing talismans blessed by priests. Others blame the stars or the Jews or sinners. Everyone has an answer, and none of them work. Panic sets in. You see people flee, some into the forests, others toward cities, believing they'll find safety. But the cities are even worse. In towns like Florence, Paris, and London, the dead are stacked like firewood. Entire neighborhoods vanish. Ships sail out to sea and never return their crews, too sick to dock again. You hear about people abandoning their families, locking sick relatives inside and walking away. And maybe you understand. Maybe part of you would do the same. You think of your children if you still have any. You try to keep them clean. You whisper prayers over them as they sleep. You ration food, boil water again and again. You watch them for symptoms, every cough a drumbeat of dread. If they fall sick, you don't know what you'll do. Love becomes a risk. Affection feels like a gamble. You hear stories of plague doctors in distant cities, men in long black robes with beaked masks stuffed with herbs. They walk from house to house, poking bodies with sticks, scribbling notes. They might as well be ghosts. You'll never see one in your little village. You're left to fend for yourself, and the dead keep piling up. Eventually, the grave diggers die too. No one is left to bury the corpses. That task falls to whoever remains, old men, scared boys, anyone who can hold a shovel. Mass graves are dug in the hills. Pits, really. No prayers, no names, no markers. Just bodies tossed in layer upon layer until the earth groans under the weight of it all. You've stopped counting. There's a man who walks the village at dusk. You've seen him once or twice, alone or quiet, carrying a heavy bag. He doesn't speak, just knocks on doors, leaves food behind, moves on. You think he might have lost everyone. Maybe this is how he mourns, by helping others. Maybe he just wants something to do. You're grateful, but you don't speak to him. Words feel dangerous now. Even breath feels dangerous. You speak less. You stay still. You dream in silence. Eventually, the death slows. No one knows why. It just ebbs. Fewer coughs, fewer bells. A strange hush descends, almost peaceful but haunted. You step outside more often. The sunlight feels too bright. The village is smaller now, quieter, but not dead, not entirely. You walk past homes where families once lived. The doors are open, the hearth's cold. A cat slinks through a broken window. You feel like an intruder trespassing in the aftermath of something biblical. You've survived. But what does that mean now? The Middle Ages were already dark, but this was a darkness with no light at the end. No reason. No fairness. Just death, indiscriminate and ruthless. And yet somehow the world keeps turning. But the plague didn't just kill, it changed everything. The survivors now look at the world differently. The old systems tremble. The bonds between rich and poor, priest and peasant begin to shift. And with that, a new fear emerges, chaos. Because when the rules break, what comes next? You wake up to a world that feels emptier. The plague has taken so much, your friends, your neighbors, the rhythm of your village. But the sun still rises, and your body still moves. You wonder what that means. Is this survival, or is it just waiting for whatever comes next? The streets are quieter now, but also strange. Things feel out of order. The land has no one to till it. The harvest is late. Fields lie wild and overgrown, as if nature herself has forgotten to obey. And you begin to notice something else, the rules that once held everything in place, the laws, the customs, the expectations. They don't seem to apply anymore, at least not in the same way. Before the plague, your life was scripted. You owed labor to the Lord. You followed the priest's teachings. You kept your head down and your place clear. But now the Lord's manor is half empty. His steward is dead. The reeve hasn't been seen in weeks. The hierarchy is wobbling, and people are taking notice. Someone in the village speaks up, a younger man, strong, angry. He says what others are thinking. Why should we give our grain away if the granary's half full? Why work all day when no one's watching? And suddenly, the whispers become louder. You feel it like a current stirring under the surface. You start working less, not because you're lazy, but because you're exhausted. Emotionally, physically, spiritually drained. The fear hasn't left you, but it's shifted. Now it's fear of what this new world will demand. And then something even stranger happens. The lords begin to worry. Not just about food or taxes, but about control. They've noticed what you're doing or not doing, and they don't like it. Their authority depended on obedience, not just strength. So they pass laws quickly, harshly. Wage limits, movement restrictions, a crackdown on peasants asking for more pay or more rights. You hear about one such law, the Ordinance of Laborers. It says that no one can ask for higher wages than before the plague, that you must work even if the land is empty and the food is scarce, even if half your family is buried and you can barely stand. The idea stings. You feel it like a slap. You did everything they asked. You lived through hell. And now, instead of relief, you're being punished for surviving. Tensions rise. Villagers talk in hushed tones. There's a restlessness, a sense that something big is coming. You've never heard people speak like this before, about rebellion, about justice, about fairness. These are not words that used to belong to you, but now they swirl in the air like the smoke of evening fires. You hear about uprisings in distant places, bands of workers refusing to toil, peasants marching toward castles demanding that their voices be heard. It feels impossible. It also feels inevitable. Your village isn't ready for open defiance, but the thought is planted, and that's dangerous enough. You walk through the manor grounds one afternoon cautiously. The once busy stables are quiet. The fields are neglected. You pass a statue worn, mossy, forgotten. It's a knight, his sword drawn, his gaze proud. A relic of a world that believed in chivalry and honor and the divine right of kings. You stare at his stone face and feel nothing, because none of it protected you. Not the knight, not the priest, not the king. The feudal system, once an unshakable truth, is beginning to fracture. Serfs who were bound to land are now being offered money to work elsewhere. The cities are calling with promises of freedom and coin. You've never thought of leaving before, but now you do. It frightens you, but it also excites you. Could there be something more? Still, change comes at a cost. You hear of a nearby village where men tried to form a group to ask for better terms. The Lord had them arrested. 2 were hanged. 1 was branded. The rest returned to the fields quieter than before. The message is clear: change is not welcome. Not yet. But deep down, the Dark Age isn't just about death and dirt anymore. It's about silence being shattered. People are questioning. And once questions begin, they don't stop. You notice other cracks forming. In the church, the priests preach louder, harder, more desperately. Some say the plague was punishment for sin. Others speak of the end times. But behind their eyes, you see something else: doubt. They're not sure anymore. Too many prayers went unanswered. Too many priests died. Too many sacred relics failed to heal the sick. The faith is still there, but it's trembling. You remember the Sunday when the new priest came, young, stern, full of fire. He preached that obedience would save your soul. That questioning was a sin. That suffering was a gift. But his voice wavered when a child cried out during Mass. A raw, broken sound. And the congregation didn't flinch. They were used to the sound of pain. That's what the Middle Ages have become familiar with: pain. But you're changing. You're thinking. You're seeing. And maybe that's what frightens the powers that be more than anything: the slow awakening of minds too long buried under duty and fear. So you continue your work, but now with questions in your head. What if things were different? What if power could shift? What if suffering wasn't just accepted, but challenged? Those questions will take centuries to answer. But they've begun here, in the aftermath of death, in the dirt of a field, in the silence of a half-empty village. And just as your thoughts begin to expand, the world begins to shrink, for out there, far away, empires are rising and falling, wars are simmering, and your little life is about to be swept into something bigger, bloodier, and far more confusing. Because now it's time for crusade. The village buzzes with rumors, names of distant lands you can't pronounce, and talk of holy wars you don't understand. But one word rings clear above all the confusion: crusade. It's spoken with awe, fear, and a strange kind of pride, as if marching into war might cleanse not only the sins of your soul, but the rotting sickness of your world. You hear it first from a traveling friar. He arrives in your village unannounced, with a coarse robe, bare feet, and a booming voice. His sermon is thunder rattling through the square, pulling peasants and lords alike into its gravity. He speaks of Jerusalem, of infidels, of reclaiming holy soil, of God's favor, of heaven. He says anyone who joins the crusade will be forgiven all sins. Just like that, as if years of misery, hunger, and guilt can be washed away with a sword and a banner. You're not sure what to think. You've never been farther than the market 2 villages over. You've never seen the sea. And now you're supposed to imagine fighting in the deserts of a land that might as well be another world. But men are signing up. Some from your own village. The blacksmith's son. A few younger monks. Even one of the Lord's stewards. A man who wore velvet on feast days, now preparing to sleep in the mud for a cause no one truly understands. They say the Pope himself has declared it a holy mission, that Christ appeared in visions, that this is the will of heaven. And still, no one really knows what it means. You see banners being stitched with crosses. You hear the clang of swords being reforged. You watch as boys become soldiers with nothing but the promise of salvation and maybe plunder dangling in front of them. There's a fever to it. Not the kind that kills the body, but the kind that dulls the mind. That makes you believe you can leave behind the darkness here by marching toward a brighter one elsewhere. That war of all things might be the light at the end of this tunnel. But what you don't yet know is that these holy wars are just as brutal, just as senseless, and just as dark as the plague that came before. Some men leave and never return. Some come back, changed, haunted, scarred, twisted by what they saw. And others come back rich. Not in gold necessarily, but in stories. Stories of cities so massive they dwarf your entire village. Of spices and silks. Of languages that dance like music. Of palaces and mosques and people who pray to a god with different names. Stories of heat so dry it cracks your skin, and of battles so fierce the earth drinks blood for days. You hear about sieges that last for months, about starvation and surrender, about entire cities being wiped out, men, women, children, all in the name of God. You ask yourself, what kind of holiness requires this? The Crusades are not just wars. They're movements, machines. Once set in motion, they devour everything: faith, money, bodies, truth. And you realize that while they may start far away, they reach deep into your world. The taxes rise. The bishop comes to collect coin for the war effort. Even though you're not fighting, you must help pay for those who are. The priest tells you it's your Christian duty, that even giving a few pennies is a sacrifice worthy of heaven. So you give what you can. A hen, a loaf, a silver pin, and it still feels like it's not enough. You begin to notice who isn't affected. The lords mostly, the rich. They might send a son or a cousin, but they don't march themselves. They don't sleep in the fields or bleed in the dust. They sit in their halls warmed by fire and wine, listening to news from the front, as if it were a bard's tale instead of a human tragedy. You start to wonder what this holy war is really about. And you're not the only one. Some say it's about power, trade, control over land and ports. Others say it's about fear, the fear of a different religion, a different culture, a different truth. And some say it's just the same old story, the rich sending the poor to die, dressed up in banners and incense. But you still can't look away. You hear stories of the Children's Crusade, thousands of young people who believed they could walk to Jerusalem and end the war with purity alone. Most never made it. Some were sold into slavery. Others simply vanished, swallowed by the road. Even innocence isn't safe here. Even hope is dangerous. But war, as it always does, leaves behind more than just bodies. It brings change. Slowly, unsteadily, you begin to see things shift. Foreign words enter your language. New foods, raisins, almonds, even pepper begin to show up at distant markets. A few monks start copying books in Arabic, eyes wide at the unfamiliar knowledge held inside. The East has crept into the West, and something ancient begins to crack. It's not enlightenment yet, not even close. But the darkness flickers just a little with the strange foreign light of other worlds, still. For now, you remain where you are, huddled in your thatched hut, listening to stories of glory and gore, praying the war doesn't come any closer. knowing deep down that whatever's happening out there, it'll come home eventually. Because war never stays away forever. And as swords are raised in distant deserts closer to home, another kind of war brews a quieter one fought not with steel, but with ideas, in secret rooms, on parchment, in whispers that question everything you've been told. Because what happens when people learn to read, when knowledge once locked behind monastery walls begins to seep out into the world? You're about to find out. The parchment feels strange in your hands. Thin, brittle, fragile, like dried leaves. You're not sure why you're holding it, you can't read. Almost no one you know can. Words are for priests and scribes, for nobles and monks, for people who sit at desks, not dig in fields. But lately, something has shifted. That same curiosity that grew in the plague's silence and the crusaders' absence has found its way into your village. It started small. A friar began teaching letters to a few children. Nothing official, nothing the bishop would endorse. Just scratches in the dirt with sticks, letters like pictures, strange and wiggly. But it caught on. And now here you are staring at a scrap of writing like it holds magic, because in a way it does. Knowledge used to be a locked door, a heavy wooden one bolted by tradition, sealed by power. But now the hinges are starting to creak. The monasteries, those cold stone vaults of learning, still guard their libraries. Shelves of handwritten scrolls and books, each one the work of a monk's lifetime. Hours bent over ink and vellum, copying word after word by candlelight. Books are sacred, expensive, precious. One mistake, one blot of ink can ruin a page, but they're also intoxicating, because in them someone far away can speak to you across time, across language. And slowly, people are beginning to listen. A merchant's son visits your village with a book, an actual book, bound in leather smelling of oil and dust. He can read, and as he sits in the square reciting lines aloud, people gather around him like he's a prophet. You don't understand the words, but the rhythm is hypnotic. You close your eyes and let the sound of it wash over you. It feels dangerous and sacred and new. You want more. That desire to learn, to know, to understand is beginning to spread. Not just among the rich, but among common folk like you. There's something rebellious about it, something powerful. Because knowledge challenges everything. The church says the earth is the center of the universe. But you've heard whispers of thinkers, philosophers, astronomers who say otherwise, who talk of stars as suns and of the earth as a speck spinning through space. Madness, maybe, but the idea sticks. And then there's the Bible. For so long it was locked behind Latin. The priests read it, interpreted it, owned it. You listened. You obeyed. But now, in secret corners of the continent, people are translating it, writing it in languages you understand, languages you speak. This terrifies the church, because once you read the Bible for yourself, you might stop believing them. You might start believing you. You hear about a man named Wycliffe, a priest who dared to translate the scriptures into English. His writings are banned, but they circulate anyway, hidden in hay carts, copied by candlelight, passed from hand to trembling hand. You've never seen one, but you've heard the rumors that he believed the church was corrupt, that God spoke to everyone, not just clergy, that the poor had souls just as rich as any bishops. And the church responds with fury. Books are burned, heretics hunted, but ideas once set free don't die so easily. A blacksmith in your village begins quoting things. Nothing dangerous, just thoughtful. He's been listening to the merchant's son. He wonders aloud why the priest never explains certain passages, why questions are met with silence. You nod. You've wondered too. It's thrilling and terrifying. Because to learn is to become dangerous, not with weapons, but with questions. The kind of questions that shake foundations, that scrape the mortar from ancient stones. But access is still limited. Books are rare. Paper is expensive. Ink must be made from ash and berries and iron and writing. It's an art, a laborious one. Most people still use symbols or pictures or oral stories, but the hunger for more is growing. Then, far away in the German lands, something extraordinary happens. A man named Gutenberg builds a machine, a press. It takes letters, small metal blocks, and arranges them. It presses ink onto paper again and again. No more copying by hand. No more months spent on one book. Now dozens, hundreds, and soon thousands. You won't see one for years, maybe decades, but you hear about it. About how fast ideas are spreading. About pamphlets criticizing kings, questioning priests, imagining new worlds. About a storm of thought that no bishop, no lord, no monarch can control. The printing press changes everything. It means that one man's thoughts can travel, can multiply, can reach your ears even if you live 100 miles from where they were written. It means that your village, once isolated, is slowly becoming part of something bigger. A web of knowledge, of argument, of rebellion and discovery. It's dizzying. You're still surrounded by mud and hunger and superstition, but the air feels different now. Charged. Full of something you can't name. And you realize the darkness of the Middle Ages isn't just filth and famine and fear. It's silence. Enforced silence. The kind that keeps people in line in ignorance in chains. And that silence is starting to break. But light, even the softest flicker, brings shadows. Not everyone wants the world to change. Not everyone wants the poor to read, or the peasants to question. Not everyone sees truth as a gift. The backlash is coming. And soon, words will become weapons used not just to enlighten, but to divide, to inflame, to incite. A new fire will rise, and with it new heresies, new wars, and a new kind of terror. Because now that the mind has begun to awaken, the soul must decide what to believe. And belief in the Middle Ages, that's a matter of life and death. The air feels tighter these days, not with smoke or weather, but with tension. Ever since the talk of reading, of questioning, of translating holy words into common tongues, the mood in your village has changed. People still go about their days feeding chickens, patching roofs, hauling firewood, but there's a weight pressing down on every conversation. A cautiousness, as if everyone has realized at once that words can be dangerous. And yet belief, deep, unshakable belief, is still the air you breathe. The church is not just a place you visit. It is your clock, your map, your judge. It decides when you fast, when you feast, when you marry, when you mourn. It shapes how you speak and how you think, and it has done so for as long as you can remember. Maybe even longer than memory. The priest still stands tall in the pulpit, hands raised, Latin flowing from his lips, like water over stone. You don't understand the words, but you know the shape of them, the cadence, the promise. He speaks of heaven and hell like they're cities on a road you'll someday walk. He speaks of sin like it's a worm inside your chest, one that must be starved or cut out. And you believe him. You have to. Because what else do you have? You have no doctors, no scientists, no therapists, no schools. When your child coughs blood, when your crops fail, when you dream of teeth falling from your mouth, who do you turn to? The priest, the church, the crucifix nailed to the center beam of your home. But lately, even belief feels fragile. A local man, quiet older with cloudy eyes and ink stains on his fingers, was accused of heresy. You still don't know why. Something about what he said in confession. Or maybe what he didn't say. He was taken away quietly. No trial, no funeral, just gone. No one speaks his name now. You start to realize how quickly faith can become a prison. There are rules, dozens of them, about food, about sex, about money, about clothing, about what to say and what not to say. And these rules aren't suggestions. They're law, spiritual and social. Break them and you don't just risk punishment. You risk damnation. The fear of hell is real, not as an abstract concept, but as a constant presence. In paintings on church walls, in every carved figure and flaming mural, hell is vividly alive. You've seen it, demons tearing souls apart, fire licking the edges of a sinner's mouth, men and women writhing in chains, while angels turn away. It terrifies you. And that's the point. Because fear is a tool, a leash. The tighter it's pulled, the more obedient the flock becomes. You once asked the priest what would happen if someone never confessed their sins. He narrowed his eyes and said nothing at all. But his silence said more than words could. That person, whoever they were, would burn. Forever. The church teaches that suffering in this life is good. That it purifies. That the more you hurt, the more you will be rewarded later. So you accept your backache. You accept your hunger. You accept the death of your sister, the failure of your crops, the silence of your prayers. You accept it all. Because heaven is waiting. You hope. Still, doubts creep in. You've heard whispers of new ideas coming from the cities Florence, Avignon, Prague. Some say the church is too rich, too political, that the Pope himself lives in luxury while peasants starve, that bishops wage wars like kings, that relics are being sold to the highest bidder, that forgiveness now has a price tag. And that's the part that stings. You've heard of indulgences, little slips of paper sold to absolve sins. Donate a coin and a soul climbs out of purgatory. A relative maybe, or even yourself. It feels wrong, like someone has placed a toll booth on the road to heaven. But who are you to argue you've never read the Bible? You've never met the Pope. You've never stepped inside a cathedral so grand that its ceilings disappear into heaven itself. Still, something feels off. You notice people giving less. Not because they have less, but because they trust less. The collection basket doesn't clink like it used to. The kneelers in the chapel sit empty more often. A woman you once saw praying with her forehead pressed to the stone floor now stays home. And then comes the talk of reform. You don't understand it all, but you hear the names Jan Hus, John Wycliffe. Men who question doctrine, who argue that faith should be simple, that Christ, not the Pope, should be the true head of the church. Men who believed the laity deserved to understand their faith, who believed the word should be heard by all, not just spoken by a chosen few. It's thrilling and terrifying, because every time someone challenges the church, the fire rises. Literally, heretics burn, and the crowd gathers, not to cheer, but to watch and to learn that this is what happens to those who think differently. And yet, you feel something shifting inside you. You still pray, still fast, still cross yourself at every bell. But now it's not because you're told to, it's because you're trying to understand. You want to know, not just what to do, but why. Faith is no longer a blanket. It's a question mark. You don't speak this aloud, not yet, but others do. A boy in the next town was caught with a forbidden text. Not magic, not heresy, just a copy of the Gospels in the local language. He was beaten, publicly. You shudder when you think about it. But also, you wonder what the book said. This is the new darkness. Not the absence of light, but the war over who controls it. Who gets to speak, who gets to know, who gets to believe in something different. And as that war spreads, it prepares to take on new forms. Belief will soon be wielded like a sword. It will divide towns, shatter families, and draw blood. Because if people start choosing what to believe, then what happens when they stop believing in the king? When they stop fearing his crown, rebellion is stirring. And this time, it's not whispered behind church walls, it's shouted from castle gates. You first hear the word rebellion in a whisper, as though speaking it aloud might summon punishment. It slips from the mouth of a traveling tinker passing through your village with wares that no one can afford and stories everyone wants to hear. He mentions peasants rising up, not in anger exactly, but in desperation. It makes your stomach clench, because you understand that desperation. You live it. He says it happened in France, then in Flanders, then England. And not just one or two villages, but thousands. Entire regions swept up in protest, in fury and hope. They're tired of taxes, tired of war, tired of the lies wrapped in gold and gospel. You listen wide-eyed, half-believing and half-terrified. You've been told your whole life that questioning your place is dangerous. Now people are doing more than question their burning manners. And you think, maybe the world is changing. The news from England rattles you most. It's 1381. A tax called the poll tax is demanded from every man, no matter how poor. Not a tithe for the church, not payment for food or tools, just a tax for existing. It breaks people. They've already survived plague, war, starvation, and now they're being told to give more. Again. So they rise. Peasants, laborers, artisans, men with pitchforks and women with nothing but stones and words. They storm the cities. They burn tax records. They drag royal officials from their homes. And they march on London. On London. You can't imagine it. That kind of courage. That kind of fire. To stand in front of palaces and demand justice. One name echoes in the tales: Wat Tyler, a common man who somehow became a leader, charismatic, bold. He speaks of freedom, of equality, of a world without lords and masters. You barely believe such words could be spoken without lightning striking from heaven. But they are. Loudly. Proudly. And for a moment it seems like it might work. King Richard meets the rebels. He promises reforms, an end to serfdom, fair wages, freedom. For one shining instant, the peasants believe they've won. But then betrayal. Wat Tyler is killed, cut down during negotiations. The king turns on his promises. The rebels are scattered, hunted, hanged. The movement crumbles like ash in the wind. You feel the chill of it from your corner of the world, even if it's far away. Hope can burn fast and leave nothing but silence behind. And yet, something lingers. The lords rebuild their halls, yes. The taxes return. The punishments resume. But something's cracked that can't be mended. The idea that peasants you could stand up and speak has taken root. The fear isn't gone, but it's not alone anymore. Now it has company defiance. In your own village, things feel tense. The steward watches you all more closely. The priest warns against pride and disorder. He says obedience is the only path to peace. But his voice doesn't carry like it once did. You catch yourself thinking treasonous things, like why do they rule and I suffer? Or what makes them better than me? You'd never say it out loud. Not yet. But others are beginning to. And it's not just peasants. In the cities, the merchant class is growing. Men who don't own land, but who trade cloth, spices, salt. They grow wealthy without noble birth. Some send their sons to school. Some fund chapels. Some buy the favor of princes. They sit at the edges of power, and they want more. They don't call themselves rebels, but they reshape the game just the same. It's becoming harder to tell who's in charge. You see lords struggle to maintain order. Castles need repairs. Lands go untended. There are fewer peasants now. Too many died from plague and war, and those who remain are less obedient. They want wages. They want choices. They want respect. The old ways are weakening. Even the coins feel different in your hand. They pass more often. Markets thrive in new towns. Artisans grow bold, setting prices, forming guilds. There are rules now written by people who work, not just those who rule. The peasant is still low in status, yes, but he's starting to count. And still the war drums never stop. Kings raise armies. They clash for land, for pride, for symbols painted on banners. You hear about the 100 Years' War. It started before you were born, and it's still not over. France and England locked in endless combat, soldiers, burning villages, pillaging crops, conscripting young boys barely old enough to hold a hoe. You pray every night that your son, if you have one, won't be taken, because rebellion has a price. Everything does. And yet in all this, a strange new dream starts to form. You imagine a world where your voice matters, where you can read, where your work earns more than scraps, where your children don't kneel in fear before men born into wealth. You don't know what this world would look like, but you feel it pulling at you like a tide. You're not alone. And while your village still wakes to the same crowing rooster and the same aching hunger, your thoughts are no longer chained to the mud beneath your feet. They reach upward, outward, beyond. That alone is a kind of rebellion. But ideas must be fed to grow. And soon the spark lit by these uprisings will find fuel in an unexpected place, a canvas, a carving, a poem. Art is coming, not just for the nobles, but for you. And art, when it finds its voice in darkness, it begins to sing. The change doesn't arrive with trumpets or parades. It doesn't storm in like an army or preach like a bishop. It comes quietly like a brushstroke on parchment or a chisel tapping stone. It comes in the form of art, but not the kind that's locked in cathedrals or hoarded by kings. This time it's different. Art is beginning to breathe, to reach into the lives of common people, to reflect their world, their pain, their wonder. And in doing so, it brings light to the dark. You see it first in the church, of course. That's where it always begins. A new fresco is being painted on the chapel wall. Not the stiff, distant saints you're used to, but something warmer, softer. The Virgin Mary, with cheeks like your sister's. Jesus, with tired eyes, not just holy ones. The baby in his arms squirming like every child you've ever held. It stirs something in you. You're used to icons that command fear. Figures that float untouchable high above the world you know. But this looks real. Human. You stare longer than you should. You feel like you've seen something sacred and familiar. That artist came from the city. He spoke with strange vowels and carried his paints like a knight carries a sword. Someone said he trained under a man named Giotto, a painter who changed everything by giving emotion to faces and space to scenes. You don't know the name, but you feel the shift. Art is no longer only for heaven. It's beginning to look like earth. And then the sculptures start to change. Not just angels with blank expressions, but peasants bent in toil, suffering saints who bleed, soldiers carved mid-scream. You see motion. You see life. Suddenly, stone doesn't feel cold anymore. Stories once trapped in stained glass and whispered from pulpits are now alive on wood panels, in woven tapestries, even etched into coins. Painters begin to capture your world fields, bread, mothers, sickness, joy. Not just divine suffering, but everyday endurance. And behind it all, a new idea begins to form. That beauty matters. Not just as a tool for religion, but as something in itself. Something holy because it's human. You've always believed heaven was above and earth was below, that you must suffer now to be rewarded later. But these images suggest something different, that perhaps there's grace here too, in a smile, in a child's eyes, in the curve of a woman's hand as she kneads dough. The noble class still hoards the finest works, yes. Their manners fill with oil paintings, illuminated manuscripts, gold leaf miniatures. But even in your world, fragments trickle down. A traveling troubadour sings songs about love, not just courtly love, but aching, messy human love. A mason carves a rooster into the archway of the village inn, not because he's told to, but because it makes him laugh. Even laughter is beginning to matter. Stories evolve too. You hear less about dragons and saints and more about fools and dreamers. Tales of men who outwit their betters. Women who refuse to marry the Lord's son. Stories where cleverness trumps strength, where heartbeats rank. You begin to see yourself in these tales. And with that, a strange new feeling settles over you worth. You are not just a shadow, a laborer, a tool. You exist, and someone somewhere is beginning to see that, to say it out loud, in brush and quill and stone. You hear about a man in Italy, Petrarch, who writes not of war or God, but of self, of thought, of solitude. He speaks of climbing mountains just to see what's on the other side. He calls it humanism, not in rebellion against faith, but alongside it, as if to say the human soul is not worthless. It is precious and complex and beautiful. This is new. In your world, the soul has always been a battlefield between sin and salvation, between dust and glory. But now it is also a mirror, one worth looking into, and not just for men. Women begin to appear in art differently, not just as saints or mothers, but thinkers, patrons, poets, queens who commission chapels, nuns who paint miniature books. You don't see this in your village yet, but you hear about it. You cling to those stories, because they suggest a world where worth is not always inherited or bought, but earned, or simply seen. The art reaches you slowly, like sunlight through a thick canopy. But once it touches you, you can't forget the warmth. You begin to crave it. You want more stories, more color, more music. You hum tunes you never heard before. You trace shapes in the dirt, wondering how to mix berry juice into pigment. You stare longer at the clouds, wondering how someone might paint their edges. And that wondering, that is the revolution. Because darkness isn't just the absence of light. It's the absence of imagination. And now across Europe, imaginations are stirring. Painters like Jan van Eyck are capturing human faces with uncanny detail. Architects are dreaming taller building cathedrals with bones of glass. Poets are writing not in Latin, but in the words you speak every day. The seeds of the Renaissance are being planted. You don't know the word yet. You wouldn't recognize its full bloom even if it landed in your lap. But you feel it. You live it in every strange new image, every melody that doesn't come from church bells, every face in a painting that looks like someone you know. And once you've seen the world painted not as it should be, but as it is messy, aching, vivid, you can't go back. The darkness is still here. Hunger still gnaws. The Lord still rules. The priest still preaches. But under it all, a brighter thread has begun to weave through the night. And soon that thread will pull open something even deeper. Because when people begin to imagine a world outside the one they know, they start to build it. And somewhere in the distance, in a dusty room stacked with scrolls and silence, a man is drawing circles, trying to understand the stars. And the stars, they're about to become more than decoration on a ceiling. They're about to become a map. You've spent your whole life under the stars, gazing up from muddy fields, from hay-stuffed beds, from behind the wooden slats of a crumbling roof. You've never doubted they were there for a reason. The priest said they were fixed to the firmament, like jewels set in motion by the hand of God, to guide you, to warn you, to remind you how small you are. And you believed it. But now, somewhere far from your village, someone is beginning to ask how they move, why they shine, what they mean not in sermons, but in numbers, in math. His name might never reach your ears, but his ideas are already beginning to stir the dust of centuries. His name is Copernicus, and what he's suggesting will one day break the sky open. But for now, you still live in a world where the earth is the center of everything, where the sun, the moon, and the stars spin lovingly around you. It's a comforting thought, even if it's wrong. It makes sense of the chaos. It tells you that your suffering matters, that the entire universe is watching. So when someone says otherwise, even quietly, even humbly, it feels like an earthquake. You don't yet know the terms heliocentrism, elliptical, orbit gravitational pull, but their consequences will one day shake kingdoms, silence cathedrals, and redraw the shape of knowledge itself. You've seen glimpses of this new way of thinking. The local apothecary, who used to sell nothing but dried herbs and honey water, now keeps strange devices on his shelf. A brass ring, a half-sphere, a chart with circles and tiny drawings of moons. He calls it an astrolabe. He says it helps him track time by the stars. You nod like you understand. You don't. But you notice something. He asks more questions than he answers now. He stares at the sky, not with fear, but with fascination. You've always been told to look down at your work, at your sin, at the soil. But these people, they're looking up, not for signs from heaven, but for patterns, for truth. A strange thing to search for God, not in a chapel, but in a shadow cast by a planet. Still, the church holds firm. The heavens are divine, perfect, unchangeable. To say otherwise is blasphemy, heresy, a crime against the order of creation. But people keep asking. A man named Dante writes about the stars not just as objects, but as destinations. He imagines entire cosmic systems, a map of hell, purgatory, paradise. His poem, The Divine Comedy, becomes something of a universe in itself. Not scientific, but philosophical, grand, human. You wouldn't understand the whole thing, but if someone read it aloud, your heart would stir. Because in his version of the cosmos, your soul has a place, a journey, but still others go further. Leonardo, they say, draws machines that fly, machines that mimic birds, that dream of reaching the sky, not through divine ascent, but through understanding, through design. And soon Galileo will point a telescope into the night and see something shocking. The moon is not perfect. It's scarred, pitted, flawed. And if the moon has flaws, maybe the heavens aren't divine. Maybe they're natural. You don't know these men. You won't meet them. But their questions filter down like snow melt, slow, cold, constant. You hear things. Someone says the stars are suns, that the earth spins, that comets aren't omens but rocks, that the universe might be endless, endless. The thought makes your stomach flip. Your entire life has been bounded by village walls, by church law, by fields that end in forests you've never dared to cross. The idea of infinity unsettles you. What does it mean to live in a universe with no edge? Where does God live if not above? Where is heaven? No one has an answer. But the questions keep coming. In your village, the priest grows stricter. He warns against vain curiosities. He preaches about humility. He says God's mysteries are not for man to decipher. And part of you agrees. What good is stargazing when your child is hungry, when your teeth ache, when winter is coming, and the grain bins are empty? But another part, small flickering, wants to know. You wonder what else might be misunderstood. If the stars aren't fixed, maybe nothing is. You begin to think of the world like a clock, not a mystery, but a mechanism. One that can be studied, taken apart, rebuilt. Not everyone likes this. There are whispers of men being arrested for saying too much, for writing down what they saw in the sky, for thinking in ways that threaten the old story. But the questions keep spreading, and knowledge once whispered in corners now travels faster than ever, thanks to printing to trade to letters exchanged across borders. A new age is rising, one rooted not in tradition, but in evidence, in proof, in testable truth. The church will fight it, kings will fear it, but they cannot stop it, because truth is not a flame that can be snuffed out. It is a fire that leaps from one mind to the next, growing brighter with each spark. And you, peasant, though you may be, are beginning to feel its warmth. You still kneel at Mass. You still fear hell. You still toil, pray, bleed. But now when you look at the stars, you don't just see fate. You see questions. And questions in a world that has always told you what to think are the beginning of freedom. But ideas alone are not enough. Change needs hands, craftsmen, thinkers, poets, rebels, and it needs money, gold, trade, coins to fund voyages, to buy books, to feed minds. And so, from the ashes of the feudal world, a new kind of power begins to rise. Not born from swords or crowns, but from commerce. Because before the enlightenment can dawn, the merchants must take the throne. You've always known your place. You work, you serve, you endure. The land belongs to the Lord, your time belongs to the church, and your fate belongs to God. But now something's shifting, not just in the stars, not just in books, but in coin, in markets, in movement, and in the strange, powerful new language of commerce. It begins, as always, in the cities. Not your village, not yet. But in places you've only heard about in story and song, Venice, Florence, Bruges. Cities whose names roll off the tongues of traveling merchants like prayer. Places where ships unload spices and silks and silver, and where a man can grow rich, not by birth, but by trade. Trade. It's becoming the new gospel. You hear of merchants with no titles, no lands, and no bloodline to boast of, yet somehow they wield influence. They fund cathedrals, they lend money to kings, they hire painters and sponsor scholars. They build palaces and marry their daughters into noble families. Wealth, once a shadow cast by the sword, now glows with the shine of minted gold. And gold, unlike titles, can move. The roads you once feared, haunted by wolves and bandits, are slowly transforming. Trade routes now web across the continent. You see more travelers passing through, men with strange hats, women wearing perfumes that sting your nose, carts full of things you don't have names for. Lapis from the east, cloves that make your tongue tingle, fine cloth soft as a breeze. It feels like the world is folding inward, tightening, becoming closer. And at the center of it all, money. Not just the kind you bury in jars or spend at the fair, but credit, debt, contracts, investments, new words, new ideas, new powers. You don't understand all of it, but you feel the tremble beneath your feet. You feel your world being bought, sold, and reimagined in columns of numbers and promises. Even your Lord seems nervous. He still holds your labor by custom and law, but you can see it. His manor needs repair, his fields lie fallow. His steward rides into town more often than he used to. He's trying to adapt, to survive in this new economy where land alone isn't enough, where power is starting to wear finer boots and speak in terms of profit. And then comes the guild. You hear of one forming in a nearby town. Bakers, weavers, tanners, all banding together. Not just to protect their trade, but to set prices, regulate quality, train apprentices. It's not a revolt, it's order. But not the order imposed by a lord. This is order created from within by craftsmen, by people like you. It's a new kind of strength. Your cousin who left the village years ago writes that he now works in a city shop 7 days a week, dawn to dusk, but for wages. Real money. He sleeps in a loft, eats salted fish, and says the air smells of smoke and ambition. He says he's saving up for his own tools. Maybe one day, his own shop. You reread his letter by candlelight, your hands black with soot. And you wonder, what would that life be like, no Lord? No bowing, just work and coin. But even this dream has its shadows. Cities grow crowded. Disease returns. Not the Black Death, but enough to hollow out whole neighborhoods. Fires sweep through markets. Crime follows opportunity, and not everyone shares in the wealth. For every man who rises, 10 more sink under rising prices and impossible debts. Banks appear strange institutions with heavy locks and wide ledgers. They lend gold and expect more in return. Interest. A word you've only recently come to know. Some say it's a sin. Others say it's the future. And then there are the ships. They sail farther now, past without the known maps, past the edge of the world your grandfather spoke of in hushed tones. You hear about new lands rich in spice and gold, lands with people who wear feathers and worship gods you've never imagined. Some call it discovery. Others call it conquest. Either way, it fills the treasuries. Kings grow bolder. Merchants grow richer. And you remain on the edge watching the world spin faster, wondering if it will throw you off or pull you in. But even here in your quiet village, you feel the reach of this new world. A peddler sells glass beads from Venice. A priest mentions an invention called double-entry bookkeeping. A noble's son travels to study mathematics in Spain and returns with maps drawn with lines and angles instead of monsters. Everything is being measured, priced, traded, and beneath it all the old structures groan. You notice that the tithe feels heavier, that lords demand coin now, not chickens or grain, that rents increase but wages don't. You begin to understand what your cousin meant when he said, freedom comes with a cost, and still, you want it. You want to sell your goods without begging permission. You want to keep what you earn. You want to decide where to live, how to pray, what to believe. Commerce isn't just changing how people buy, it's changing how they think. The idea that you can shape your life, not just endure it, is revolutionary. Not everyone sees it. Not everyone wants it. But the merchants, the bankers, the craftsmen, they're writing a new script. And though it's written in ledgers and contracts, it carries the same message as the stars and the scriptures. The world is changing. So can you. And as gold glitters and ships return and cities swell, a strange confidence begins to grow. If men can redraw maps and build empires and weigh risk in numbers, what else might they do? Might they chart the human soul? Might they seek truth not from tradition, but from within? Because just beyond this age of coins and contracts waits something even more astonishing. An age of artists who see beauty in flesh, of thinkers who dissect the body, of visionaries who write of reason, liberty, and dignity, an age when the darkness finally cracks and light pours in. Renaissance is coming. The first time you hear the word Renaissance, you don't know what it means. It sounds foreign, soft on the tongue, like something wrapped in silk. You hear it spoken by a merchant's clerk, his nose in a book, muttering about Florence and genius and rebirth. It's not a word meant for you, not yet, but it will come for you all the same. Because the world is waking up, not with a shout, but with a breath long and deep after centuries of spiritual sleep. People are no longer content just to survive. They want to understand, to create, to shape the world with their minds and hands. And suddenly, you are surrounded by ideas that would have been heresy a generation ago. You see it first in images. Paintings arrive from the south, oil on canvas, too vivid to be real. Faces that look back at you. Not icons, not saints lost in heavenly fog, but people, real people. Their eyes wet with thought. Their skin alive with shadow. You've never seen anything like it. The Virgin Mary now holds her child like a real mother, tired, tender, worried. Christ looks not distant, but human. And in that humanity, something sacred flickers. You begin to hear names passed from mouth to mouth like rumors or sacred relics. Michelangelo, who carved stone until it wept. Raphael, who painted rooms that made scholars weep. Donatello, who turned bronze into motion. Brunelleschi, who built domes that defied the sky. They are not just artists, they are architects of a new way of seeing. The body, once a source of shame and sin, is now a marvel. Men study its shape, its bone, its muscle, not in secret, but openly. They draw it, dissect it, honor it not as temptation, but as truth. You hear of men stealing corpses from graves, slicing flesh beneath flickering candlelight, sketching what they find. It sounds monstrous. It is also brilliant. Even books begin to change. You've always seen them as holy objects, heavy, precious, locked behind monastery doors. But now they arrive in translation, in poems, in essays. Bound in leather, yes, but meant to be touched, to be read, to be debated. A man named Erasmus writes of reason and reform. A man named Pico della Mirandola declares that humanity is not fixed, but free. That you peasant or priest can shape your soul like clay. That God gave man not a place, but potential. And these ideas burn brighter than any candle in your chapel. You feel it in the air, this hunger to know. Not just to believe, but to understand. To see the stars, the body, the soul, not as riddles, but as revelations. You don't need permission anymore to wonder. You only need courage. And still the world clings to its old fears. Some say this art is vanity, that dissecting bodies dishonors the dead, that placing man at the center of the canvas is an act of blasphemy. And perhaps they're right. But the canvas doesn't lie. And when you look at these new paintings, when you see light fall across cheekbones, when you see hands folded in quiet reflection, you don't feel arrogance. You feel awe. Awe at what a human hand can do. Awe at what the mind can imagine. Even the way people build changes. Churches now stretch not just upward, but outward, welcoming light through great glass windows. Streets widen, plazas open. Statues stand proud in public squares, not just locked away in chapels or palaces. Beauty becomes something to share. You hear of a city, Florence, where art and money and power swirl together like wind. Where bankers fund philosophers. Where poets dine with popes. Where a man named Leonardo builds wings, paints secrets into women's smiles. and writes notes backward so only mirrors can read them. It sounds like magic, but it's not. It's human, and that's what scares the old order most. Because this Renaissance is not about rejecting God. It's about finding Him within, in proportion, in reason, in love. It's about seeing holiness in the curve of an arm, in the logic of a poem, in the glint of a telescope. It's about replacing fear with wonder. And you born in mud, baptized in silence, are beginning to see the world not as a trap, but as a question you might one day answer. You find yourself staring at the moon longer than before. You draw shapes in the dirt without realizing. You listen more closely to traveling musicians. You wonder what a brush dipped in color might feel like in your hand. You may not become a scholar or a sculptor, but you are changing. Because this rebirth is not just for the nobles or the monks or the kings. It is for everyone who dares to think. You still tend your fields, still kneel in prayer. But now beneath your wool cap, ideas flicker. You are not merely surviving, you are becoming. And as painting spread and music soars and philosophy pulses through the press like blood through a vein, you sense what's coming. The church will resist. The rulers will grow nervous. Because when people begin to think for themselves, when they realize they are not shadows, but shapes, power trembles. And trembling power makes dangerous decisions. Soon that trembling will lead to sparks. To nails on doors, to flames licking at heretics' robes. Because the Renaissance doesn't just give birth to beauty, it gives birth to reformation. It starts, as all revolutions do, with a single act. A man walks up to a church door, wooden weathered quiet, and hammers a list of grievances into it. 95 of them. Not with fire or shouting. Not with swords or banners, just paper ink and a conviction so strong it cannot stay silent. His name is Martin Luther. You've never met him. You likely never will. But his hammer strike in Wittenberg echoes louder than 1,000 battle cries. Because it hits not just wood, but the very heart of everything you've been taught to obey. The Reformation has begun. You hear the name Luther whispered like a curse and a prayer. Some say he's mad. Some say he's holy. Some say he's the devil himself. But he is asking questions, dangerous ones. Why must salvation be bought? Why must the Bible remain in Latin? Why is the church more concerned with gold than grace? And suddenly, what once seemed immovable, Rome the Pope, the hierarchy of salvation is trembling. You've heard of indulgences. You've seen them passed out like tickets to heaven. A coin dropped in a coffer, a soul freed from purgatory. That's the promise. The church builds cathedrals with that gold, prints the Pope's image with it, fills libraries and funds crusades. But Luther says no. He says salvation is a gift, not sold, not owned, not taxed. You don't understand every word. But you understand the feeling, the injustice, the arrogance, the silence you've endured all your life when you asked too many questions. And now someone is asking for you. Others join him, Zwingli in Zurich, Calvin in Geneva. Preachers rise in England, in France, in the Low Countries. They preach in your language, not Latin. They open the Bible in front of the poor. They tear down statues and strip the gold from altars, claiming the only decoration a church needs is the Word of God. It's exhilarating and terrifying. Because the church does not go quietly. Those who challenge it are declared heretics, excommunicated, hunted, burned, and yet they keep preaching, they keep printing, they keep spreading. You see it even in your own village. One day the priest says Mass in Latin as always. The next, a traveling preacher arrives and reads from the gospel in the local tongue. People gather in the square, confused, curious, some clutching rosaries tighter. He speaks of faith, not fear, of Christ, not Rome. And for a moment you feel like something in you lifts. You begin to think, maybe heaven is closer than you were told, but it doesn't come without blood. Soon neighbors begin to turn on one another, families split. One brother joins the reformers, the other clings to the old ways. Churches are sacked, monasteries dissolve, choirs fall silent, windows shatter. It is not just a religious war, it is a war of identity. Because in this new world, your beliefs are no longer just private feelings, they are public declarations. And the question that echoes louder than any bell is this: what do you believe you've never had to answer that before you obeyed? Now you choose. And that choice can be lethal. Wars break out. The German Peasants' War leaves thousands dead. You hear of entire towns burning in France during the wars of religion. In England, the king declares himself head of the church. Monks are hanged. Nuns cast into the streets. Martyrs multiply. And in all of it, the printing press pours ink like blood. Pamphlets fly from hand to hand. Satirical woodcuts show the Pope with horns. Sermons denounce the Virgin. Every group claims to hold the truth. Every group fears the other's fire. Even beauty becomes dangerous. The icons you once gazed at with wonder are now condemned by some as idols. You hear of statues, smashed paintings painted over candles snuffed. Churches that once glowed with light and gold now sit bare, stark, hollow. Some call it purification. Others call it desecration. You don't know what to think, But you do know this: the world feels less stable than ever. Everywhere you turn, someone is shouting a different truth. You used to fear only sin. Now you fear wrong doctrine. You used to ask the priest what to believe. Now you ask yourself. And that is both liberation and burden. Still, something remarkable is happening. You're reading more, maybe not full books, but verses, prayers, fragments. You hear music in new languages, harmonies stripped of Latin, pure and piercing. You gather in homes for worship, not just chapels. You speak about God around the fire. You ask questions. You form opinions. You feel awake. The Reformation doesn't fix the world. It fractures it. But in that fracturing, something long hidden is revealed. That faith is not a chain, but a choice. That salvation is not bought, but believed. That the darkness of the Middle Ages wasn't just famine or disease. It was control. Control of thought, of fear, of hope. Now the candle has been passed into the hands of the people. Some will shield it. Some will fan it into flame. Some will use it to burn. And as the smoke of schism rises, so does something else, a new world waiting to be explored. For if man can challenge the heavens, question kings, and read scripture for himself, what else might he discover beyond the oceans, beyond the maps, beyond the stars? The age of belief has cracked, and now begins the age of discovery. You always believed the world ended at the edge of the sea. Beyond that, nothing. Maybe sea monsters, maybe the mouth of hell. That's what the old story said, and that was enough. You didn't question it. There were fields to till, fires to build, prayers to whisper. The ocean was someone else's problem. But now the stories have changed. Now they say the world is round. They say ships are crossing oceans and coming back again full of gold, of cinnamon, of people whose skin is darker than yours, who speak strange languages and worship unfamiliar gods. They say whole continents have been found, that the world is larger than anyone ever dared to imagine, and that someone can own it. You don't understand how someone can discover a place that's already filled with people. But the kings and explorers seem not to care. They plant flags, they draw borders, they bring priests, and they call it the New World. You hear names that ripple through your village like thunder from far-off storms. Columbus, Magellan, Vespucci, Cabot. Men who vanish over the horizon and return with riches. Or don't return at all. You see the ripple in your world, even though you're still rooted in your patch of soil. Sugar arrives in lumps. Silver coins grow heavier. A nobleman's feast now includes peppers that make your lips burn. And behind every taste is a story soaked in blood. You begin to hear darker tales of whole islands emptied, of temples burned, of languages silenced forever. The men who sail west do not return as they left. They return harder, richer, sometimes broken. Some speak of cannibals and beasts, others of kingdoms richer than anything in Europe. But always, always they speak of conquest, of taming, of possession. You look at the sky and wonder if we were wrong about the shape of the earth. What else are we wrong about? There's a map painted on the wall of the inn in the next town. It's crude, bright, filled with creatures. But there across the ocean, there's land. Not just an island or a coast, but an entire world. You stare at it long after the others stop looking. A sailor sits beside you. He smells of salt and wine. He says he once saw a city made of gold, another made of bones. He laughs, but not cruelly. He's not sure anymore what was real. You nod because neither are you. The discoveries keep coming, not just of land, but of ways to live. You hear of people who don't kneel before kings, who share everything, who worship trees or stars. Some of these tales are lies. Some are truths wrapped in fear, but they make you think. They make you question the natural order that's ruled your life. And yet, even as the world expands, your place in it remains uncertain. The same people who trade in spices and maps also trade in people. You hear whispers of ships packed tight with bodies, of men and women taken from their homes, shackled, bought, sold. Their names replaced with numbers, their cries swallowed by the sea. You don't know what to do with this knowledge. You're barely free yourself. You don't own land. You don't read much. You still bow when the Lord passes. But somehow this seems different. Worse. The world is growing richer, yes, but at what cost? You hear of empires rising, of navies with guns so loud they flatten walls, of plantations so vast they devour forests, of explorers who write journals with ink while their soldiers write history with swords. Your priest says it's all part of God's plan. Your neighbor says it's the devil's work. You just keep working. And yet inside you something stirs, a thought that won't go away. If the world is this big, then I am not so small. You are not a shadow in someone else's story. You are a person living on the edge of something vast and terrifying and beautiful. A world that keeps unfolding. And you're not alone. Everywhere people are waking up, reading, questioning, traveling, changing. Ideas cross oceans now. Not just goods, but truths. Truths about liberty, about dignity, about rights. Words like equality and reason begin to appear in pamphlets. A philosopher named Locke writes that kings do not rule by divine right. That government should serve the people. That liberty is natural. You don't know his name. But someone reads his ideas at the tavern one night. A cobbler argues with a merchant. A widow nods slowly. A blacksmith says, if that's true, then we've all been lied to. You say nothing. But inside you, the candle flickers brighter. The age of discovery is not just about land and gold. It is about awakening. The old world, your world, is no longer the only one. And as maps stretch and borders blur, the questions grow louder. What is truth? What is power? What is freedom? They won't be answered quickly. Not without war. Not without more darkness. But the questions are alive now. And next they will find their sharpest voice not in gold or ships or swords, but in reason, in rights, in the belief that every human being, even a peasant born into mud, deserves to think, to speak, to choose. The enlightenment is coming, and it will not whisper, it will proclaim. The dawn doesn't arrive all at once. It never does. Instead, it creeps slowly across the centuries, inching into corners, once choked by smoke and silence. And here at the end of the Middle Ages, as the last echoes of plague and parchment sword and superstition fade into memory, the light begins to speak clearly, defiantly, for the first time in a very long while. This is the Enlightenment. You hear the word in passing. At first it means nothing to you. Just a murmur in the streets of Paris, a theory argued in a Dutch salon, a speech given in a London tavern. But soon it becomes something more. A wind gathering strength, carrying with it dangerous, dazzling, world-breaking ideas. Not about stars or kings or even God, but about you. You, the peasant. You, the woman behind the hearth. You, the apprentice, reading by firelight. You, who for so long were told you were nothing. Now voices rise in defense of your something. Voltaire mocks the power of kings and the cruelty of priests. He writes of tolerance, of justice, of the poison of dogma. His words are sharp, furious, alive. You hear that his books are banned, so naturally they're read more than ever. Rousseau declares that man is born free, but everywhere is in chains. He speaks of nature, of corruption, of a world stolen by wealth and hierarchy. He writes that laws should serve all, not just the few. The words are radical, beautiful, and they find their way into the mouths of commoners. Diderot builds an encyclopedia, not to hoard knowledge, but to share it. Page after page, mapping out everything known, and some things still uncertain. It's a monument not of stone, but of thought. And everywhere people begin to believe that reason might be sacred too. You've spent your life kneeling before truths handed down from above. But now truths rise from within. From observation, from experience, from the courage to say, I will think for myself. You still go to church, yes, but you also begin to ask, why does suffering mean holiness? Why does power hide behind faith? Why do some voices matter more than others? You're not alone. Salons open in cities' rooms where men and women debate ideas over wine and candlelight. The guests aren't kings, they're thinkers. A printer's daughter sits beside a general. A seamstress speaks her mind without flinching. Knowledge is no longer sacred because it's rare, it's sacred because it's shared. Even science begins to speak louder. Newton explains the laws of motion and gravity not as divine mysteries, but as mechanics. The same apple that falls from your tree obeys the same rules as the stars above. It is simple, it is beautiful, and it makes the universe feel strangely intimate. You begin to feel part of it. Philosophers challenge monarchy. The idea that a man rules because of his blood now feels absurd. Pamphlets circulate about natural rights, life, liberty, property. You hear of governments by the people for the people, of social contracts where power flows upward, not down. It feels impossible. And yet here it is, printed, spoken, marched through the streets. In America, colonists whisper of independence. In France, crowds begin to stir. In England, Parliament debates limits on the crown. The air grows electric with possibility. And for the first time in memory, the question is not just who rules us, it's should anyone but the Enlightenment is not gentle. It burns just as it illuminates. Old powers fight back. Books are banned. Writers are jailed. Some pay with their lives. There is still darkness, corruption, war, empire. But now it cannot go unchallenged. It cannot hide behind incense and Latin. The people are watching. You who were once silent are listening. And soon you will speak. Maybe not from a pulpit, maybe not with eloquence, but in your choices, your beliefs, your refusal to accept what you've been told without question. And that, more than any invention, is the true beginning of the modern world. You look back now and see the path behind you, the caves and castles, the famine and faith, the plague, carts, the cathedrals, the burnings, the paintings, the books. You see the darkness, and you see how inch by inch, thought by thought, people learned to light their own candles. You are not yet free, not truly, but you are awake. And now that you've seen the dawn, you'll never mistake the dark for truth again. So now you settle in. The echoes of history soften the clatter of swords, the chant of monks, the hammering of revolution, they fade. The darkness of the Middle Ages was never just in the sky above or the filth beneath your feet. It was in the silence, in the fear of asking, of dreaming, of being. But that silence has been broken. And here you are, tucked beneath your blanket, a traveler of time gently floating through centuries of ash and ink. You've stood at the edge of plague pits, heard sermons echo in cold stone, watched fire consume books and people alike. And yet you've also witnessed art blossom, ideas ignite, and the soul begin to breathe. That's the rhythm of history. Not a straight path, but a spiral. A climb through fog. A reaching out. Always becoming. You don't need to remember every date or name. Just this, the Middle Ages were not just dark. They were honest. Brutal, yes, but real. They were the soil from which wonder would one day rise. Now your eyes grow heavy. Let the flickering candlelight of memory lull you. Let the old chants fade into humming. Let the ink dry and the stars settle into stillness. You've walked through centuries tonight. You've seen the dark. You've seen the flickers of light. And now, it's time to rest.